Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so you're here because, you want to get smart fast, right? Without your brain feeling like it just ran a marathon through a textbook.
Yeah, we get it.
Welcome to your express route, sort of, to understanding something pretty important. Flying your drone legally and safely up here in Canada.
Right. We're basically going to unpack the essential rules of the skies. Stuff every Canadian drone pilot needs to know. Think about it. We've sifted through, a ton of those practice questions.
Oh, yeah, those ones.
Yeah, the ones on distances, airspace, charts, all that jazz. And we've boiled it all down to the absolute must-know nuggets.
Exactly. Our mission today is just to grab those critical insights, those aha moments, so you can feel, confident, totally in the know every time you launch.
And we're using those practice questions as our guide. They cover all of the key stuff.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Distances and airspace boundaries. What's the big one? The absolute height limit we need to keep hammered into our heads?
Okay, the fundamental legal limit. That's 122 meters, or 400 feet, above ground level AGL. That's your ceiling. Can't go higher without special permission.
400 feet AGL. Got it. And around airports, obviously super sensitive. What's that critical distance?
Right. Airports.
Yeah.
You've got to keep your distance. At least 5.6 kilometers. That's 3 nautical miles away from any airport, unless you have a specific authorization.
Makes sense. You don't want to be anywhere near planes taking off or landing.
Exactly. And for keeping track of where you can and can't fly, like in real time, what's the tool everyone needs?
That's got to be NAV drone, right?
Yep, the NEV drone app. It's pretty much essential. Your digital co-pilot, showing you live airspace boundaries right there on your device.
Okay. And we keep saying AGL. Let's just quickly clarify. What does above ground level actually mean in practice?
Good point. AGL just means height directly above the ground right underneath your drone. So if you're flying over, say, a deep valley, your 400 feet starts from the bottom of that valley.
And if you're over a hill?
Then it's 400 feet from the top of that hill. It follows the terrain.
Gotcha. Okay, moving to those aviation charts, the VNCs. If you see a Class C control zone, what does that usually look like on the chart?
You'll typically see a dashed magenta line. That line outlines the Class C airspace. These are often around the big, busy airports with lots of controlled traffic, so definitely watch for those magenta dashes.
And if you need to measure how far you actually are from an airport on that VNC, how do you do that accurately?
Well, every VNC has a scale bar printed right on it.
Right.
You can use that with a ruler or even those old school compass dividers if you have them.
Yeah.
Measure right on the chart.
Way better than just eyeballing it based on a highway you see.
Oh, much better.
What?
Way more precise.
Okay, what about keeping clear of people? People just walking around, not involved in your flight. What's the minimum distance there under the basic rules?
For basic RPAS rules, you need to stay at least 30 meters away horizontally from anyone not involved.
30 meters. Okay, that's a fair bit of space. 3 school buses end to end, maybe?
Yeah, roughly that. It's a buffer zone for safety.
All right, let's piece some things together. Say you check your map, you're about 1.5 kilometers away from a heliport. Seems okay, right? Can you just fly there?
Actually, no. Good question. But the no-fly zone around a heliport without permission is a bit bigger. It's 1.9 kilometers, which is 1 nautical mile.
So 1.5K puts you inside that zone.
Exactly. You'd be in violation. Really shows why knowing the exact numbers is key.
It really does. And it's not just civilian spots, right? What about military areas, CYRs?
Absolutely. If you see airspace mark CYR Canadian Airspace Reserve, the rule is crystal clear. Stay out, unless you have explicit written permission. Doesn't matter how far in, any entry without authorization is forbidden.
Right, so CYR is restricted from the ground up usually, but what if airspace starts higher up? Say Class E airspace starts at 700 feet AGL. What does that mean for me flying my drone down at, say, 350 feet?
Well, if you're flying below 400 feet AGL, as the rules require for basic OCS, and that Class E doesn't start until 700 feet, you're good. You're flying legally underneath it in, most likely, Class G airspace.
Okay. Still good to know what's above you, though.
Definitely. And just to clarify terms, when we talk about the floor or ceiling of airspace,
Yeah.
think of it like layers in a building. The floor is the altitude where that specific type of airspace starts from below. The ceiling is where it ends going up.
Got it. Like invisible floors and ceilings in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the VNC. How do you reliably figure out your distance from controlled airspace using the chart?
Okay, first, find the marked boundary line on the VNC. It'll be labeled. Then use that scale ruler on the chart to measure the actual distance from where you plan to fly to that line. Don't just guess.
Right. And why can't you just use like a major road or a specific building you recognize on the ground to judge your distance from an airport's no-fly zone? Seems easier sometimes.
Because only the official aeronautical charts and tools like NAV drone are legally recognized for defining these boundaries, roads, buildings. They aren't mapped with the precision needed for aviation rules, and their position relative to the actual airspace boundary might not be accurate on a simple map.
Okay, official sources only. Makes sense. What about those shaded areas you sometimes see on VNCs? Transition zones.
Yes, those shaded bits, usually magenta. They typically indicate Class E airspace that starts at a specific altitude above the ground, often 700 feet AGL or 1,200 feet AGL. It's basically a heads up that controlled airspace begins at that level.
Okay. And if you just need a quick estimate, maybe for planning over a larger area, are there digital tools for rough distances?
Yeah, things like Google Earth or even drone mission planning software. They often have tools to measure straight-line distances. Useful for quick look, but always confirm with official VNCs or NAV drone for the legal boundaries.
Always double check. Good rule. Okay, let's combine some ideas. Flying near a Class C airport zone, what two things must you confirm before launching? Non-negotiable.
Okay, two critical things. First, your planned takeoff spot must be physically outside the lateral boundary of that Class C zone, as shown on the VNC or in any drone.
Right, outside the line.
Second, even if you are outside that line, you also need to be more than 5.6 kilometers, that's 3 nautical miles, away from the airport itself, unless, again, you have specific authorization.
So, outside the zone and far enough away. Both conditions.
Both have to be met, absolutely.
And if you see a tower symbol on the VNC, how do you figure out the horizontal distance to it?
Same principle. Use the chart's scale bar and a ruler or a digital measuring tool on an electronic VNC to measure the straight line distance from your location to the tower symbol.
Okay. Here's a scenario that sounds like trouble. Flying at 400 feet AGL, your maximum height, and you drift into airspace that actually starts at 300 feet AGL. What happens then?
That's a definite airspace violation. You've entered controlled airspace, potentially Class E starting at 300 feet, without authorization. Illegal and potentially dangerous. Shows why knowing vertical limits is just as vital as horizontal ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what about those Class F advisory zones, CYA zones? They have boundaries on the chart. What do you need to consider if you're flying near one?
Two main things for CYA zones. First, will your flight path actually go inside its side-to-side boundaries? And second, maybe more importantly, is that CYA zone actually active when you plan to fly?
They aren't always active.
No, they often have specific times or days they're used. You absolutely must check the NOTAMs notices to airmen to see if it's active.
NOTAMs. Got it. Perfect segue. Last point on this, planning an autonomous flight, like with waypoints near restricted airspace, what's a critical safety check?
You have to meticulously check that every single waypoint in your automated flight plan is safely outside the restricted airspace boundaries. Use official sources like VNCs or NAV drone for this. Don't just assume the overall path is okay. Check each point.
Check every single point. Solid advice. Okay, let's shift gears. Airspace classes in Canada, A through G. Which one is generally the most accessible for drone pilots? The one with the fewest hurdles?
That would definitely be Class G airspace. It's considered uncontrolled, typically found at lower altitudes, and it's where you can usually fly your drone without needing specific permission from air traffic control, ATC.
And way up high. Which class is that?
That's Class A airspace. It starts way up at 18,000 feet, so well beyond where any standard drone operates.
Right. Okay, back down near the ground, those big international airports. What airspace class usually surrounds them, and what's the rule for flying there if you just have your basic drone certificate?
Major airports are almost always inside Class C airspace, and the rule for basic RPAS pilots is strict. No flying in Class C without specific prior authorization from NAV Canada, period.
No exceptions for basic pilots in Class C. Got it. So which classes pretty much always require that NAV Canada approval before you fly a drone?
You'll always need NAV Canada authorization for Class C and Class D airspace. You might also need it in certain parts of Class E, especially near airports or above certain altitudes, but C and D are the definite ones requiring permission every time.
Okay. And Class F restricted airspace. What does that label mean for us?
Class F restricted, often shown as CYR, means exactly that. Entry is restricted. For drones, that means flight is prohibited unless you've been granted specific permission by the controlling authority. It's a definite no-go zone without that explicit okay.
What kind of activities usually happen in Class F airspace? Why is it restricted?
Class F is often used for specialized things. Military flight training, air shows, maybe rocket launches, parachute jumps, things that require the airspace to be cleared for safety.
We mentioned Class D earlier. Quick refresher, the main difference between flying in Class D versus Class G.
Big difference. Class D is controlled airspace. You need authorization, and ATC provides services to manned aircraft. Class G is uncontrolled. No routine ATC services, much less regulation, but still requires you to be vigilant.
And Class E, what are the key takeaways for that one?
Class E is also controlled airspace. It's often used for aircraft flying under instrument flight rules, IFR. It might have a control tower, might not. It generally starts at a certain altitude above the ground, like 700 or 1,200 feet AGL, but can extend down to the surface around some airports.
So if you're flying in Class G, which is uncontrolled, but you're near a small airport that doesn't have a tower, what precautions are essential?
Even in Class G, near an untowered field, you need extreme vigilance. Keep your drone in sight, VLOS. Constantly scan for planes taking off or landing, listen for aircraft sounds, and always give way to any manned aircraft. They have the right of way.
Okay, back to Class E for a sec. Can basic drone pilots ever fly in Class E without authorization?
Sometimes, possibly. It's tricky. If the Class E airspace starts, say, at 700 feet AGL, and you're flying well below that, like under 400 feet AGL, and you're not near an airport control zone that might extend Class E to the surface, you might not need authorization.
Might.
Emphasis on might. You absolutely must verify this using NAV drone or current VNCs. The rules can be complex, varying by location. Never just assume it's okay in Class E. When in doubt, check official sources or just don't fly there.
That really drives home why knowing the airspace class before you fly is so fundamental. Why is it just not negotiable?
Because the airspace class dictates everything. The rules you follow, whether you need permission, the potential traffic, it's the foundation of flying safely and legally. Ignorance isn't an excuse if you cause a problem.
So if someone is unsure, is this Class C, Class G, what are the definitive resources, the go-tos?
Number one is the NAV drone app. It uses your GPS to show you exactly what airspace you're in or planning to fly in. Second are the current official VFR navigation charts, VNCs. Those are the authoritative sources.
We said Class G is least regulated, so just to confirm, which class offers the most operational freedom for drone pilots?
Definitely Class G, provided you're following all the other basic rules, staying below 400 feet AGL, maintaining VLOS, keeping distance from people, etc.
Now, CYR zones Class F restricted. That R is important. What does it specifically signify, and what's the immediate action?
The R literally means restricted. The immediate action is do not fly there unless you have explicit official permission from the agency controlling that specific CYR zone. Full stop.
Okay. And you mentioned Class C and D are both controlled, needing permission. What's the difference in the type of air traffic control service provided in C versus D?
In Class C, ATC provides full separation services between all aircraft, both VFR visual and IFR instrument. In Class D, ATC mainly provides separation for IFR aircraft and advisory services for VFR aircraft. So Class C generally have a higher level of control.
Interesting distinction. Okay, scenario. Planning a flight in Class E airspace, but you need to go up to 500 feet AGL. What's the first thing you absolutely must determine?
First, you need to confirm if that specific Class E zone's controlled airspace actually extends down that low to 500 feet AGL.
Yeah.
If it does, or if you're near an airport within that zone, you'll definitely need NAV Canada authorization. Plus, flying above 400 feet AGL anywhere usually requires an advanced operations certificate, not just basic.
Right, multiple layers there. And just to reiterate the basic limit, in Class G, what's the max altitude for a basic drone pilot without special permission?
Still that 400 feet AGL. Going above that, even in Class G, violates the standard operating rules.
And finally, for airspace classes, how is Class E usually depicted on those VNCs? What visual cues show it?
You'll typically see Class E shown in a couple of ways, either by a dashed magenta line if it forms a control zone extending to the surface around an airport, or by shaded magenta areas indicating where Class E starts at a higher altitude, like 700 or 1,200 feet AGL. The chart legend explains these symbols.
Okay, understanding those classes is absolutely fundamental. Let's switch to something a bit more physical. Magnetic interference and the drone's compass. What's the actual sensor inside the drone acting as its compass?
That's the magnetometer. It's a tiny sensor that detects the Earth's magnetic field to figure out the drone's heading, which way it's pointing.
Okay. Now here's a common temptation for a launching spot, maybe. But why is taking off from the roof of your car a really bad idea?
Oh yeah, don't do that. A car is a huge chunk of metal, plus it has electrical systems, all of which can create strong magnetic fields and interfere with your drone's compass and even its GPS right at takeoff. Can lead to issues immediately after launch.
Right. So if the drone tells you, hey, calibrate the compass, what's the proper procedure? Where should you do it?
Always follow the exact instructions from your drone's manufacturer. It usually involves rotating the drone in specific ways. And critically, do it in a wide open area, far away from any large metal objects, power lines, buildings, anything that could mess with the magnetic field.
Give us a couple everyday examples of things that could cause that interference on the ground.
Sure. Things like steel manhole covers, reinforced concrete with rebar inside, metal fences, underground pipes or cables, even just being too close to your car.
Back to basics. What's the compass's main job on the drone? Why does it need one?
Its primary job is determining the drone's heading the direction it's facing, relative to magnetic north. This is essential for stable flight, navigation, and executing commands correctly.
And what's a super important feature that really depends on that compass being accurate?
The return to home RTH function. Hugely reliant on the compass. If the compass reading is off, the drone won't know the correct direction to fly back to its takeoff point. It can fly off in the wrong direction entirely.
Which could lead to a flyaway, right? What exactly is that, and how does a bad compass cause it?
A flyaway is basically when the drone loses connection or control and just flies away, often uncontrollably. A faulty compass feeding bad hitting data to the flight controller is a common cause. The drone thinks it's going one way when it's actually going another, leading to loss of control.
Okay, so when should you actually recalibrate the compass? Is it every flight?
Not necessarily every flight, but definitely recalibrate if you've traveled a significant distance to a new location because the Earth's magnetic field varies. Also, recalibrate if the drone shows any signs of flight instability, like wobbling, drifting, or having trouble holding its position, or if the app prompts you to.
We mentioned rebar and concrete. Why is that specifically a concern for drone pilots, especially in urban areas?
Because rebar is steel, and large amounts of it in structures like bridges, parking garages, or even sidewalks can create localized magnetic distortions. If you take off too close or fly very near these structures, you can throw off your compass readings.
What are some telltale signs during a flight that might suggest magnetic interference is happening? What should you watch for?
Look for unexpected drifting when you haven't commanded it, the drone suddenly starting to spin, or toilet bowl flying in widening circles, or getting compass error warnings in your flight app. These are red flags.
What happens if the compass and the GPS start telling the drone different things, like they disagree on where it's going?
That disagreement can really confuse the drone's brain, its flight controller. It might trigger a fail-safe mode, like trying to land immediately, or it could just start flying erratically as it struggles to reconcile the conflicting information.
And is this interference only a risk at takeoff, or can it pop up mid-flight?
It can definitely happen mid-flight too. You might fly over an area with underground metal or near a structure you didn't realize had strong magnetic fields. It's not just a takeoff problem.
Good to know. Many drones have a manual flight mode, often called ATTI, or attitude mode. How can that be helpful if you suspect a compass issue?
Switching to manual or ATI mode often relies less on the compass and GPS for stabilization. It gives you more direct control over the drone's movements. If the drone starts acting weirdly due to sensor issues, switching to manual can sometimes allow you to regain control and land it safely. Requires practice, though.
Even small electronics. Can things like portable speakers or radios cause interference?
Yes, potentially. Speakers contain magnets, and radios emit electromagnetic fields. If you have these too close to your drone during setup or takeoff or even near your controller, they could interfere with the compass. Best to keep them away.
If you get a compass warning flashing on your screen mid-flight, what's the immediate best course of action?
Land. Land as soon as possible, safely. Don't push it. Don't try to finish your mission. A compass error is a serious potential problem, and continuing to fly increases the risk of losing control or having a flyaway.
Okay, scenario time. Flew perfectly fine on location X this morning, go back this afternoon, same spot, but now the drone's heading is unstable, maybe drifting. What could have changed?
Could be something simple. Maybe someone parked a large truck or a van right near your takeoff spot. Or perhaps some temporary metal equipment was moved into the area. Something metallic nearby that wasn't there earlier is the most likely culprit.
What if the compass seems calibrated, but it's slightly misaligned? Like, it thinks north is a few degrees off. What might you notice?
You might see drifting during straight flight paths, especially in autonomous modes like waypoint missions. The drone might not track perfectly straight because its internal sense of direction is slightly skewed from reality.
Where are the worst places to try and calibrate a compass? Where is it almost guaranteed to fail?
Right next to a steel fence, directly under high-voltage power lines, on top of a reinforced concrete structure, near large metal objects. Basically, anywhere with obvious sources of strong magnetic fields. You need a clear open space.
And what about intermittent errors? Compass seems fine, then glitches, then fine again. What could cause that?
That could be caused by flying over inconsistent magnetic fields, like maybe crossing over underground power cables or pipes at certain points in your flight path, or flying near buildings with varying amounts of metal structure.
Finally, after you do the calibration dance, how do you know it actually worked? What's the confirmation?
Usually, the flight app will give you a calibration successful message. More importantly, you shouldn't see any persistent compass error warnings. And when you're ready to fly, the drone's indicated heading on the app should look stable and match the actual direction it's pointing.
Okay, dealing with magnetic interference is definitely a key skill. Let's move on to another core concept, controlled versus uncontrolled airspace. Which class, again, is considered uncontrolled?
That's Class G airspace. Remember G for ground or general aviation. It's generally the airspace from the ground up to a certain altitude where there's no active air traffic control service.
And because it's uncontrolled, do you need permission to fly there?
Generally, no specific authorization from NAV Canada is needed to fly a basic drone operation in Class G, as long as you follow all the standard rules below 400 feet AGL, VLOS, away from airports and people, etc.
But for controlled airspace, what's the rule for basic drone pilots?
For controlled airspace like Class C, D, or parts of E, basic RPAS pilots absolutely must get approval from NAV Canada before flying. No ifs, ands, or buts.
And just to be crystal clear, air traffic control services, are they provided in uncontrolled airspace?
No, that's a defining feature. No routine ATC services in Class G. Pilots in Class G are responsible for seeing and avoiding each other.
So if a pilot is looking at an area, maybe on a regular map, and isn't sure if it's controlled or uncontrolled, what's the foolproof way to check?
The NAV Drone app is the quickest and most reliable way. It shows your current location overlaid on the official airspace map. VNCs are the other definitive source.
Why do we even have controlled airspace? What's its main purpose?
The main purpose is safety and efficiency, especially around busy airports and along established airways where there's a lot of air traffic. ATC manages the flow, provides separation, and coordinates movements to prevent collisions.
And those key controlled classes, Sandy, can you just pop into them for a quick flight without permission?
Absolutely not. We keep repeating it because it's critical. Prior approval from NAV Canada is mandatory for drone flights in Class C and Class D airspace.
Sometimes controlled airspace doesn't start right at the ground, right? It might have a floor at a certain altitude.
Yes, exactly. Outside of the immediate vicinity of larger airports, controlled airspace, often Class E, frequently starts at 700 feet AGL or sometimes 1,200 feet AGL. Below that, it's typically Class G.
Which highlights why you need to check both horizontal and vertical limits, doesn't it? Why is checking both so important?
Because the airspace type can literally change right above or below you. You could be legally flying in Class G at 350 feet, but if you climb to 750 feet without checking, you might suddenly be in Class E controlled airspace without authorization. You need the full 3D picture.
Can uncontrolled airspace, Class G, exist even fairly close to airports?
Yes, especially near smaller, non-towered airports or private airstrips. The airspace around them might still be Class G. But, and it's a big but, you have to be incredibly vigilant for manned aircraft operating in and out of those fields.
What happens if someone does fly in controlled airspace without permission and gets caught? What are the potential consequences?
It can lead to pretty hefty fines from Transport Canada, suspension of your pilot certificate, or other enforcement actions. It's taken very seriously because of safety risks involved.
Okay, let's say your flight path starts in Class G, but you see on NAV drone you're heading towards a Class C boundary. What must you do before crossing that line?
You have to obtain authorization from NAV Canada before you enter the Class C airspace. You either need to stop short of the boundary, reroute, or get that official permission first.
We know Class E is controlled, but you mentioned earlier it's sometimes okay for basic drones without specific authorization in certain low-level E areas. Can you clarify that nuance?
Right, it's a bit complex. While all Class E is technically controlled, if you're in a Class E area that starts at, say, 700 feet AGL and you're flying a basic operation well below that, under 400 feet AGL, and you're not inside any airport's specific surface level control zone, then you might not need authorization for that specific flight.
But the key is?
The key is absolute certainty. You must verify using NAV drone or current charts. If there is any doubt, or if you're near an airport, assume you need authorization or fly elsewhere. Don't guess with Class E.
Good advice. Let's define ATC again quickly. What does it stand for?
ATC is air traffic control, the people and systems responsible for directing aircraft on the ground and through controlled airspace.
So, given the extra rules in controlled airspace, which type offers drone pilots more operational freedom, generally speaking?
Uncontrolled airspace, Class G, definitely offers more freedom, as you don't typically need prior authorization from ATC for basic operations. Still got to follow the rules, though.
Practical scenario. Airspace is Class G up to 700 feet AGL. Above 700 feet, it's Class E controlled. Your mission needs you to go to 800 feet AGL. Can you just do that?
Nope. As soon as you climb above 700 feet, you're entering Class E controlled airspace. You need NAV Canada authorization and likely an advanced certificate to fly at 800 feet AGL there.
If NAV drone shows you're operating very close to a controlled airspace boundary, what's the prudent thing to do before launching?
Prudence dictates double-checking your exact position relative to that boundary. If you're uncomfortably close, either adjust your flight plan to give yourself more buffer within uncontrolled airspace or proactively seek authorization from NAV Canada just in case. Better safe than sorry.
How do you visually distinguish controlled versus uncontrolled on a VNC? What are the MAT cues?
Controlled airspace is usually depicted with those magenta or blue lines, dashed or solid, often forming circles or specific shapes, and they'll have labels indicating the class, CD, and altitude lettings. Uncontrolled Class G is generally the space between these defined controlled areas without those specific boundary overlays.
So, assuming all other drone rules are met, which airspace class allows flights without needing to contact NAV Canada?
That would be Class G airspace.
And one last time on this. Flying in Class E, but above 400 feet AGL, what's generally required?
Flying above 400 feet AGL, especially in controlled airspace like Class E, typically requires NAV Canada authorization and an advanced RPAS operator certificate. Basic operations are generally restricted below 400 feet.
Okay, controlled versus uncontrolled is clear. Now let's tackle special use airspace. We heard CYR before. What does CYR stand for again?
CYR stands for Canadian Airspace Restricted. The name says it all.
And the rule for flying drones in a CYR zone?
Simple and strict. Prohibited without specific prior authorization from the controlling authority for that zone. It's off limits otherwise.
What about CYA zones? What kinds of activities might happen there?
CYA is Canadian Airspace Advisory. These zones are often established for activities like aerobatics, flight training, glider operations, parachute jumping, things where pilots need to be extra aware of other potential traffic.
So CYR is restricted, CYA is advisory. What's the umbrella term for both of these in Canada?
They both fall under the designation of Class F airspace, which is the overall category for special use airspace.
What tools should a drone pilot absolutely use to check for any special use airspace before flying?
Again, it's the NAV drone app and the current VFR navigation charts, VNCs. Both will show the locations and boundaries of Class F airspace.
If your flight plan takes you near a CYR boundary, what steps are mandatory?
You must precisely identify the boundaries both horizontally and vertically using official sources. And if there's any chance your flight could enter the zone, you must obtain permission beforehand. Don't skirt the edges without confirming.
How does this special use airspace look on a VNC? What are the visual markers?
It's usually outlined with thick lines, often magenta or sometimes gray, and clearly labeled with its designation CYR plus a number or CYA plus a number.
What's the risk if you accidentally fly into a CYA zone without realizing it's active?
The main risk is collision. You could encounter manned aircraft doing maneuvers you don't expect, like aerobatics or formation flying. They might not be looking for drones, and you need to be hyper-aware and ready to give way.
Are CYA zones always active, 247?
No, definitely not. Their activity is often scheduled. That's why checking NOTAMs, notice it to airmen, and any published schedules for that specific CYA is absolutely critical before you fly nearby.
Which type of special use airspace is most commonly used for military exercises?
Military exercises typically take place in Class F restricted airspace, designated CYR.
Okay, imagine a CYA zone starts at 1,000 feet AGL. Can you fly your drone below that, say at 300 feet AGL, without issue?
Generally, yes. If your flight remains entirely below the published floor of the CYA, and you're following all other drone rules like staying below 400 feet AGL, you should be okay. However, always check NOTAMs just in case there are temporary changes or activities extending lower.
So CYA advisory versus CYR restricted. What's the core operational difference for a drone pilot?
CYR means S.P, do not enter without explicit permission. CYA means caution. Be extremely vigilant if you enter, know what activities occur there, and yield to all other traffic.
How do you find out if a Class F zone you see on the map is actually active right now?
Check the latest NOTAMs for that area. They are the primary source for activation times and details. Official aeronautical publications might also list scheduled times. An AV drone should reflect active NOTAMs too.
What if a NOTAM pops up activating a temporary restricted area right over your planned flight zone? What do you do?
You don't fly there, period. You must either postpone your flight, relocate to an area outside the restriction, or wait until the NOTAM expires. No flying in active restricted airspace without authorization.
Why is it important to be cautious even when just near special use airspace, even if a quick check suggests it might be inactive?
Because conditions can change, NOTAMs can be issued quickly, and boundaries need to be respected precisely. Plus, being near an advisory zone still means potential for unusual air traffic. It's about maintaining a safety buffer and situational awareness.
Scenario: CYA for gliders, active noon to 6 p.m. You plan to fly inside its boundaries at 1 p.m. What's your approach?
Extreme caution. You can likely enter, but you must be constantly scanning for gliders, which could be quiet and hard to see. Maintain maximum possible separation and be ready to immediately maneuver your drone out of the way. Do not interfere with the gliding operations at all.
Another one, NOTAM activates a CYR right over your site during your planned flight time. What's the requirement?
Cancel or relocate. No entry into an active CYR without permission. The NOTAM overrides any other assumption.
You see a CYD, danger area, another Class F type, on the VNC, looks inactive on the chart itself. Pre-flight action.
Confirm its status via current NOTAMs and NEV drone. Charts are static. NOTAMs provide the real-time activation information. Never rely solely on the printed chart for activity status.
What's a major hazard of flying in an active CYA without checking first?
Collision risk with potentially fast-moving or maneuvering aircraft involved in the specific activity, like military training or aerobatics. They might not follow standard traffic patterns.
And why is it risky to fly below the published floor of a CYA without checking its status?
Because the aircraft operating within the active CYA might, as part of their maneuvers, descend below the official floor temporarily or unexpectedly. Flying underneath doesn't guarantee separation if the zone is active.
Okay, respecting special use airspace is clearly vital. Let's dive into reading the maps themselves. VFR navigation charts, VNCs. What does VNC stand for again?
VNC is for Visual Flight Rules Navigation Chart, designed for pilots navigating primarily by looking outside.
And the typical scale, how zoomed out are they?
Standard scale is 1.500,000. So one unit on the chart represents 500,000 of the same units on the ground. Gives a broad overview.
That dashed magenta circle we mentioned earlier, what does it usually represent?
That almost always signifies a Class C control zone around an airport, extending down to the surface.
And VNCs are primarily for
visual navigation. Pilots flying VFR looking out the window, comparing the chart to the ground.
What key info does a VNC pack for a drone pilot?
Loads of stuff. Airspace classes and boundaries. Obstacles like towers with their heights, locations of airports and heliports, terrain features like hills and rivers, navigation aids. It's dense with information.
If you see CYR printed on the chart,
that marks restricted airspace. Stay out unless authorized.
How are obstacles like towers shown? What details come with them?
Usually as symbols like triangles or little vertical sticks. Crucially, they have numbers next to them. The top number is the elevation of the obstacle's peak above sea level, ASL. Sometimes a number in parentheses below it gives the height above ground level, AGL.
What are the top two absolute must-checks on a VNC before any drone flight?
First, identify the airspace classification right where you plan to fly. Second, check your proximity to any nearby controlled or special use airspace boundaries. Know what's around you.
What digital tool is the perfect companion to a VNC for up-to-the-minute confirmation?
NAV drone. It complements a static chart with live, dynamic airspace data. Use both for best results.
What crucial regulatory info do VNCs show that you just won't find on Google Maps or satellite views?
Airspace boundaries, airspace classes, vertical limits of airspace, restricted zones, advisory zones, airport communication frequencies, precise obstacle locations and heights, things vital for legal and safe flight that regular maps ignore.
Flying near a heliport marked on the VNC, what should you be mindful of?
Ensure you maintain the required separation distance, 1 nm, 1.9 kilometers unless authorized. Be extremely vigilant for helicopter traffic, which can arrive and depart quickly, and check for any specific local procedures if available.
Why pay attention to the terrain shading on a VNC?
It gives you a visual sense of hills and valleys, helping you maintain awareness of ground elevation. This is critical for staying within your AGL height limit, especially in undulating terrain.
How do you figure out the difference between true north and magnetic north using a VNC?
Look for the magnetic declination lines, often called isogonic lines, and the compass rose symbol on the chart. It shows the local variation, the angle difference between true and magnetic north for that area.
How does the VNC show vertical airspace limits?
Through labels directly on the chart, you'll see the class designation, like Class E, and then altitudes defining the floor and/or ceiling, often written like 700 AGL or 12,500.
How are airports and airstrips marked?
Usually with symbols representing runway layouts or sometimes as circles, often with a cross. Details like name and frequencies are listed for larger ones.
See a magenta circle labeled CYA123. What is it?
That's Class F advisory airspace, area number 123. Enter with caution. Be aware of potential activity.
Takeoff spot looks just inside a Class C magenta line. Action.
Either move your takeoff spot clearly outside the line or obtain anti-Canada authorization before flying. Don't risk taking off inside without permission.
How do you know if a tower symbol represents a lit tower for night visibility?
Look for a small lightning bolt symbol next to the obstacle symbol, or sometimes a dual triangle indicates lighting.
Trying to estimate a mountain peak's elevation without a specific number. How?
Use the contour lines. Find the innermost, highest contour line around the peak. The elevation will be slightly higher than that line's value. Look for nearby spot elevations, marked with an X and a number, for reference too.
Class E transition starts at 700 feet AGL. You're flying your drone at 400 feet AGL below it. What airspace are you in?
You're still in the underlying airspace, which is typically Class G uncontrolled, because you're below the 700-foot floor of the Class E.
Okay, VNCs are vital. Now let's talk tech. GPS, GNSS, and mapping tools. GPS stands for
Global Positioning System, the U.S.-owned satellite network providing location and time data.
And return to home, RTH, its purpose.
It's a safety feature, designed to automatically fly the drone back to its recorded takeoff point if connection is lost, battery is critical, or if manually triggered.
Essential app for airspace checks and mission planning using this tech in Canada.
NAV drone. It leverages GPS to show your position relative to airspace rules.
Can GPS signals get blocked by things like tall buildings?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Tall buildings, dense forests, tunnels, deep canyons. Anything that obstructs the line of sight to multiple satellites can weaken or block the signal. This is called signal masking or urban canyon effect.
Is GNSS generally more accurate than GPS alone?
Yes, typically. GNSS stands for Global Navigation Satellite System.
And GNSS includes?
It's a broader term, includes GPS, but also other constellations like Russia's GLONASS, Europe's Galileo, China's Beidou. More satellites means better potential accuracy and reliability.
Risk of getting a weak GPS lock at takeoff.
Big risk is recording an inaccurate home point. If RTH activates later, the drone might try to fly back to the wrong spot. Very dangerous. Always wait for a strong lock before taking off.
Planning an automated waypoint mission. Critical pre-flight check for the waypoints themselves.
You must verify that every single waypoint and the path between them is located in legal, safe airspace, clear of obstacles and restricted zones. Use mapping tools overlaid with airspace data.
Purpose of a waypoint.
It's a specific geographic coordinate programmed into the drone's flight plan. The drone uses a sequence of waypoints to navigate autonomously along a predefined route for tasks like mapping or inspections.
How do trees affect GPS?
Dense tree canopies can block or reflect GPS signals, reducing the number of satellites your drone can see and potentially decreasing position accuracy.
Confirmation of a good GPS lock at takeoff. What sign do you look for?
Usually a message like home point set or ready to fly GPS in the app. And importantly, a high number of locked satellites indicated on the controller or app display, often 10 or more, is considered good.
Tool for assessing terrain elevation before flight.
Google Earth is great for 3D visualization. Many drone mission planning software packages also have excellent terrain awareness features built in. Topographic maps work too.
What does geofencing help prevent?
Geofencing creates virtual boundaries. It helps prevent the drone from accidentally flying into restricted areas like airports or flying beyond a distance you set. It's a software-based safety limit.
Typical indicator for GPS signal strength status.
The number of satellites locked is the most common indicator. More satellites generally means a stronger, more reliable signal. Some apps might also show signal strength bars.
Can you launch a waypoint mission without a GPS lock?
Generally, no. Waypoint navigation fundamentally relies on accurate GPS positioning to follow the program path. The drone needs to know precisely where it is to navigate to the next point.
Drone uses RTH, but lands way off from the takeoff spot. Likely cause.
Most likely causes a poor GPS lock when the home point was initially set at takeoff. The drone recorded the wrong starting position.
GPS dropping out near a radio tower. Cause.
Electromagnetic interference from the radio tower transmissions disrupting the weak GPS signals.
Risk of flying under bridge tunnels using GPS.
High risk of complete GPS signal loss. This can cause the drone to become unstable, drift unpredictably, or trigger an unwanted RTH attempt while still under the structure. Very hazardous.
Mapping tool shows your planned path crosses into Class C action.
Two choices. Adjust the flight path to remain entirely outside Class C, or obtain the necessary authorization from NV Canada before flying that route.
Drone drifting way off course during a waypoint mission. App shows weak GPS, safest action.
Immediately take manual control, switch out of waypoint mode, and land the drone safely as soon as possible. Don't let it continue autonomously with unreliable navigation.
Okay, GPS GNSS is key. Let's talk about the pre-flight groundwork. Site selection and surveying. Main purpose of a site survey.
To identify all potential hazards, obstacles, people, terrain issues, signal interference sources, airspace restrictions, and confirm the location is safe and suitable for the planned drone operation. It's proactive risk management.
First tool to check for restricted airspace during the survey.
NAV drone app, using your current location or the planned site location. Check it first thing.
Flying near power lines or big transmission towers? Good idea.
Definitely not a good idea. High risk of collision, plus strong potential for electromagnetic interference affecting your drone's compass and control link. Stay well clear.
VLS stands for
Visual line of sight. You, or a designated visual observer, must be able to see the drone with your own eyes at all times without aid, like binoculars, though regular glasses are fine.
Flying from private property. Need permission.
Yes, absolutely. Always get permission from the landowner before taking off or landing on private property. Trespassing laws apply.
Why generally avoid flying over water?
Risk of losing the drone is much higher if something goes wrong. Emergency landings over water often mean the drone is unrecoverable. Water can also sometimes cause reflections affecting sensors.
Weather conditions severely limiting visibility.
Fog, heavy rain, or heavy snow can drastically reduce visibility, making it impossible to maintain VLOS and increasing collision risks. Don't fly in these conditions.
Risk of skipping a site survey in urban areas. What might you miss?
You could easily miss hazards like thin wires stretched between buildings, unexpected pedestrian traffic, new temporary structures like cranes or scaffolding, or areas with bad GPS signal reception due to buildings. Urban environments are complex.
Why avoid launching right next to trees or tall buildings?
They can block GPS signals during initial lock, leading to inaccurate home point recording. They also obviously pose a collision hazard during takeoff and landing, especially if there's wind.
You check NOTAMs, find one restricting flight at your site. Action.
Do not fly at that site while the NOTAM is active. Find a different location or reschedule your flight for when the restriction is lifted.
What should be part of your emergency plan developed during the site survey?
Definitely identify safe alternate landing zones in case your primary spot is blocked. Also, plan potential recovery routes if the drone lands unexpectedly away from you. Think about communication, emergency contacts too.
Hazard not visible on maps, but possible on site.
Temporary things are common. Construction equipment, parked vehicles, temporary event structures, tents, stages, even wildlife hazards like nesting birds. On-site inspection is crucial.
Why survey for wind conditions and potential turbulence?
Buildings, trees, and terrain features can create localized wind gusts and turbulence that might not be obvious from a general weather forecast. This can seriously affect drone stability, especially smaller drones.
Typical distance from bystanders, basic RPAS.
Minimum 30 meters horizontal separation from people not involved in the operation unless they are briefed and shielded or other specific exemptions apply.
Best map type for assessing terrain elevation.
Topographic maps showing contour lines or 3D mapping software tools like Google Earth.
Site survey reveals hawks circling overhead. Smart move.
Best to delay the flight until the birds leave or choose a different location. Bird strikes are a real risk and can easily down a drone.
NOTAM restricts flight 12.00, 16.00. Mission planned for 1300. Can you fly?
No. You must comply with the NOCAM times. Adjust your flight time or location.
Flying Class G near an unregistered airstrip found during survey. Extra precautions.
Extreme vigilance for manned aircraft. Listen carefully, scan constantly, announce your presence if possible, though not usually required for drones, and always give way immediately. Assume aircraft could appear anytime.
How can poor sunlight affect the operation?
Glare from the sun can make it very difficult to see the drone, maintain VLOS, or to see the screen on your controller. Flying into the sun is particularly challenging.
Construction crane appeared since your last survey. Action.
Must update your site survey before flying. Assess the crane's exact location, height, and potential impact on your flight path, landing zones, and emergency procedures. Adjust your plan to ensure safe clearance.
Site surveys are non-negotiable. Okay, final section. Reading map symbols, specifically on VNCs. Symbol for Class C airspace.
Dashed magenta circles.
Symbol for an obstacle, like a tower.
Usually a triangle or a vertical stick obelisk symbol with elevation numbers next to it.
Yellow shaded areas represent.
Built-up areas like towns or cities.
How are heliports marked?
Typically a circle with an H inside or sometimes just a marked dot.
Chart using symbols for airports, towers, terrain, airspace.
The VFR navigation chart, VNC.
Tower symbol. 2,300, 500, meaning
Top of tower is 2,300 feet above sea level, ASL. The tower itself is 500 feet tall, above ground level, AGL, at its base.
symbol for a lit obstacle.
The obstacle symbol will have a small lightning bolt next to it, or sometimes a double triangle symbol.
Distinguishing towered versus non-towered airports on a VNC.
Towered airports are usually shown in blue, sometimes magenta for Class D, and will lift communication frequencies. Non-towered airports are typically magenta and lack control tower frequencies.
Thick magenta boundary labeled CYR 123.
That's Class F restricted airspace, Area 123, no entry without authorization.
Purpose of contour lines.
To indicate terrain elevation and shape. Lines connect points of equal height above sea level. Closer lines mean steeper terrain.
Identifying Class E transition airspace visually.
Look for shaded areas, usually magenta, with floor-ceiling altitudes marked, often starting at 700 feet or 1,200 feet AGL.
Why identify obstacle symbols pre-flight?
Absolutely critical to avoid colliding with towers, antennas, tall buildings, or other structures. Know where they are and how high they reach.
Blue versus magenta airport symbols. Key difference.
Generally, blue indicates an airport with an operating control tower providing ATC services, often Class C or D. Magenta usually indicates a non-towered airport or one where the overlying airspace is Class E down to the surface. Check the chart legend for specifics.
Symbol for a VOR navigation aid.
Usually a hexagon symbol with the VOR frequency and identifier code printed nearby, used by manned aircraft for navigation.
Runway symbol with no frequency listed. What does it suggest?
Likely an uncontrolled airport, no tower, or potentially a private airstrip. Requires extra caution for unknown traffic.
Circle with H near your takeoff spot. What is it? What to do?
That's a heliport. Be aware of potential helicopter operations. Keep clear, maintain the required distance, and look for helicopter traffic.
Estimating terrain elevation without specific obstacles marked.
Use the contour lines and any nearby spot elevation numbers, point heights shown with an X. Shading also gives a general sense of relief.
The symbol for Class F advisory airspace. CYA, meaning for drones.
Thick magenta boundary labeled CYA, ###, means enter with caution if active, be aware of specific activities, gliders, aerobatics, etc., and yield right-of-way to manned aircraft. Check NOTAMs for activity status.
Big danger of relying only on satellite imagery like Google Maps for flight planning.
It shows zero critical aviation information. No airspace boundaries, no restrictions, no obstacle heights, no frequencies. Relying solely on it is dangerous and likely illegal. You need aeronautical chart tools like VNCs and NAV drone.
VNC shows tower, 1900, 400. Your drone max height, 400 feet AGL. Safe to fly near the base.
Definitely not safe right at the base at your max altitude. The tower is 400 feet tall from the ground. Flying at 400 feet AGL near it puts you at the same height as the top. Collision risk is extremely high. You need significant horizontal separation.
Wow, yeah. Understanding those symbols is non-negotiable.
Okay, let's wrap this all up. Big picture takeaway. Flying drones legally and safely in Canada. Well, it really comes down to understanding those distances, respecting airspace boundaries both side to side and up and down, being aware of magnetic issues, knowing controlled versus uncontrolled, recognizing special use areas, and properly using your tools like VNCs and NAV drone, plus good site surveys and understanding those map symbols.
Right, it's all interconnected, isn't it? Knowing the height limit isn't enough if you don't know what airspace you're in at that height and how to find that out using the official tools. The real aha moment, I think, is seeing how these rules work together for safety.
Exactly. They're not just arbitrary hoops. They form a system to keep everyone safe: drone pilots, manned aircraft, people on the ground. And hopefully for you listening, this deep dive has given you that concentrated dose of essential knowledge you need without being totally overwhelming.
We hope so. And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? With drone tech evolving so fast and regulations always adapting, how might these fundamental principles we've talked about change or be applied differently in the future? Definitely something that requires staying curious and keeping up with the learning, right? That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.